Ayimpunchai, good day. Thank you for being here and join us at one of the activities of PEN's Indigenous Language Week. It's a week celebration that commemorates the 2019 International Year of Indigenous Languages by the United Nations. And today's roundtable informal conversation is about what does it mean to reclaim a language? What does it mean to struggle with not speaking fluently the language of our ancestors, or not even able to speak it at all, but still being able to find some references rather in sayings from our grandparents, places that we can recall, names of food, and other memories. Before we start, I also would like to acknowledge that we are in Lenape land. We are in Lenape, Hokin, and we are thankful to the Lenape people. We are to acknowledge their presence and their vitality in what is now the Delaware Valley. Also, we would like to thank all the people that make these gatherings possible. Kelly Ryder's House for hosting us and taking the initiative to promote the languages and today's relevance of them. The Sachs Foundation for the Arts Innovation. I like that the name of the grant is about innovation, because sometimes when we think about indigenous cultures, we tend to think about ancient cultures. And this week is about celebrating what is happening now, that cultures are alive, engaging, and in constant change. The same way we are, as the Quechua program, we are happy to partner with different other institutions and organizations, such as Natives at Penn, La Casa Latina, the Greenfield Intercultural Center, Latin American and Latino Studies, the Penn Museum, the Andean Representation, the Penn Language Center. I'm going to introduce the participants of this lunch roundtable, this fantastic panelist. And here to my left is Janice Llamoca. She's an award-winning journalist and producer at NPR's Latino USA. During her time as a radio producer, she has done stories about history, language, access, and culture, and humanizes her stories with compelling voices. Janice is the daughter of Peruvian immigrants and the granddaughter of Quechua-speaking grandparents. She is currently taking Quechua language classes at the Quechua Collective of New York. And also in her biography says that she's spreading the gospel of teaching people how to pronounce Yama, because nobody says tortiLa, right? Stephanie Mach, Navajo Diné, is a collections coordinator in the academic engagement department at the Penn Museum. Mach facilitates university faculty and student access to collections and manages the summer internship program. Mach has a BA in archaeology, and an MA in museum studies, and is currently pursuing a doctorate in museum anthropology. Mach's research interests include museum policy, the history of museums, decolonizing and restorative methodologies, and settler colonialism. And today's moderator, the person who will be facilitating this conversation, is Connor Baird. He's a junior in the College of Arts and Sciences here at the University of Pennsylvania. Connor is a communications major and a Native American Studies minor, the undergraduate chair of the organization Natives at Penn. He is also a proud member of the Lumbee Tribe. Outside of Natives at Penn, Connor is involved in the performing arts community as the community service chair for the Performing Arts Council Executive Board, performing in the university's Glee Club, and also a director for Manhattan, an upcoming play that is centered around indigenous issues, which we were just talking about, that how many people can identify Manhattan, but not many people might be aware of the Lenape language origin of the word, Manhattan. So I'll leave it to Connor to start this conversation, and thank you all for being here and celebrating this conversation and relevance of indigenous languages. Please, let's introduce our participants.
Great. Great. Thank you so much. So yeah, I think just to kind of start off the conversation, we're going to talk about like I just want to ask both the participants here, how can we understand the historical legacy of not being able to speak the language of our ancestors?
So I actually wanted to, I will definitely answer your question, but I first wanted to start off with attempting to introduce myself, since this conversation is about, the struggle of learning an indigenous language. And many of you probably know that Navajo was used by the code talkers. It's an extraordinarily difficult language, so please bear with me as I attempt to read this. Yat'e, Shdine'e, Stephanie, Yinishye, Kia'ani, Nishle, Bilagana, Bashishchin. And what I said there is, my name is Stephanie. Hello, everybody. And my maternal clan, my mother's clan, is Kia'ani, and my father's clan is Bilagana, which is white bread American. So that positions me whenever I meet somebody who is Navajo. I attempt to say this so that they know who I am and how we might be related to each other. And that's kind of how we begin each of our conversations with each other. So I'm still practicing, so thank you for letting me and attempt to do that. Thanks. So to answer your question, my mother is not a fluent speaker. My father obviously does not speak Navajo, and I myself have struggled to learn Navajo my entire life. It's, as I mentioned, a very difficult language. But one thing that I did know growing up was that I was not able to speak the language of my ancestors. And the reason for that, as I've been told from a very young age, is that is because of the U.S. government, right? Those are policies that were enforced and inflicted upon our people. So it's weird to think that a 6-year-old has this conception of herself as an indigenous person where she lives in a nation where that nation does not think that it's okay for her to be who she is or speak the language of her ancestors. So, I grew up knowing that and having that kind of in the back of my mind, hence why I study museums and representation and settler colonialism today. But I think that is a good orientation for thinking about young children learning indigenous languages and it being a lifelong pursuit and the difficulties of that.
I think for me, when I think about the struggles of I think about how we understand why I or people in my generation don't speak the language of our ancestors. I think for me, there's kind of two major points, at least when it comes to me personally. The first one is migration, because my grandparents all migrated from the Andean region. All of them are from Ayacucho. Well, 3 of them are from Ayacucho, which is a southern state in Peru. And one of my other grandfathers from Huancavelica, another state, and they all migrated to the capital, Lima. Well, and then two others migrated to Callao, which is another neighboring city. But there, that's where they learned to speak Spanish to be able to work, to be able to live their life, not in the home, because in their homes they can speak their language, Quechua, what they're comfortable with, although one of my grandparents spoke different dialects of Quechua, so it's another nuance of the language. But when my parents were born, they were not taught to speak Quechua because of discrimination, which is the second reason that I don't know how to speak Quechua. So it's the migration patterns of my grandparents, also my parents, because Andean region to capital to the U.S. was a loss of languages for me. I speak Spanish pretty fluently. 100% probably not. I would say a strong 95, but that's a loss of another language I have. But for sure, Quechua is something I lost along that migration pattern and the discrimination that my grandparents faced in the capital, and just hearing the stories of them getting called names and just being told things that were just discriminatory against them. So they adapted to Spanish, and they do speak Quechua. The ones that are still alive speak Quechua today, but it's not something they passed on to their kids fluently.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess just kind of like bring this back to me as well. Like, I know from my perspective, like being Lumbee, from my understanding, my tribe assimilated so early on into like European culture. And that's a big part of the reason why we actually are still located in South North Carolina. We're the biggest tribe east of the Mississippi. But because we were able to assimilate so early on, and because of that, like I don't have like my tribe does not have our language anymore or anything. Like I've tried doing research into understanding a bit more of like what language my tribe spoke, and they aren't even really sure of the words. They think they may have like maybe like 10-ish words online from what I've been able to find, but it's really lacking. And I think because of that, for me, as someone who, like, first off, did not grow near the tribal homelands, like, I, like every other person at Penn, came from New Jersey. So, I grew up, like, far away from there, and I would go back every year, but, like, also growing up far away from that and just kind of not feeling connected to it, partially because of the language, is something, and partially because we assimilated so early on, so we don't really have that much of our original culture, I think is something that, for me at least, made me feel really like not native enough at times. And that's something that like also I feel like can be an effect of not knowing your language, I guess. Yeah, so can either of you recall any words or phrases or names of places that are connected to the language of your ancestors, I guess?
Yeah, so growing up, like I mentioned, my grandparents spoke Quechua, and my parents do understand. It's funny because now I'm taking classes and I'm just like, oh, like I call them up and I'm like, guess what I learned? And they already know the phrases and words. And I'm like, you just never taught me. And these are my mom and dad. So I was like, thanks. But so growing up, my grandparents would teach me little things, how to count, how to say like, what are you doing? Just little things like, I think what are you doing is imata monanki. Did I get that right? Yeah, they would just say like little things to me often, just to kind of, I guess, get me used to the language. But I never really thought about it until I started working in journalism and kind of just like really diving into identity and language and loss of language. And I just never really thought about how they introduced little phrases into my life, and just like even simple words like chakra, which is field. Like I'd never heard my family say field in Spanish, and I don't even know what the word is in like Spanish, like Spain Spanish. But I do know the word chakra, and I know they worked in the fields, in the farms. And they always would say it. They'd be like, oh yeah, just go like to the chakra, and like that's where we used to like, let's go meet in the chakra. So to me, like I associate that with farm, but I never thought it wasn't Spanish until I started taking Quechua classes, and I realized that a lot of the words that I was learning, they are Quechua. They are Quechua, part of the Quechua language. And there's so much, there's so many words like palta, which is avocado, but in Spanish it's aguacate. So it's like, I grew up learning, like knowing palta, and, I grew up in Los Angeles, so I was, I knew the differences between like Peruvian Spanish and like Mexican Spanish, because I grew up in a large Mexican population. But I'd never really thought about palta as a Quechua word, and so kind of learning those little things about how, Peruvian Spanish really kept a lot of Quechua words within their language, like Yama, is pretty awesome. Also, charqui, which is jerky, is dried beef, and from the Andean region. Those are like fun facts that I know about Quechua. I can give you all the fun facts. That's that.
My mother and my family never lived. My mother, grew up on the Navajo Nation, but I and my family lived away from the Navajo Nation. So if she were ever saying anything in Navajo, she was her own audience, right? Nobody else was there speaking with her. And occasionally, I would hear her saying things, like that sort of thing. But it's funny, the things that I really remember are the fact that she cursed in Navajo, because she thought maybe I wouldn't pick up on that. So I would definitely argue that the first word I learned in Navajo was a curse word. And then,
no, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I will say it because because I'm going to continue the story. So that when I was at my grandmother's house and she had sheep around, the first word, not the first, one of the first words that Navajo children are taught is a word for sheep. And I think that that says a lot about Navajo culture, dibe, that it's extraordinarily important that you know this animal and you know how to call this animal by its name, because that sheep is really at the heart of Navajo life and what we produce with weaving and what we bring to the world and our whole conception of our creation myth. So that is the first word that Navajo children learn. So I always knew dibe, and I always knew cha. Okay, that's the word. So when I was at my grandmother's house, the sheep was, had gotten loose and it was, going all over the yard. And she said, dibicha. And I was like, I understood my grandmother. I understood what she said. So it was really exciting for me, but I never told my mom that story. She'd probably be horrified that I'm telling you all. But I also have a lot of memories of my mom teaching me and my sister, trying to count, going through basic words. We have these farm animal books and color books and things like that for English, but we didn't have that growing up for Navajo. We never had all these resources that we have today that you can buy on Amazon. My mom was just doing it out of her own head, drawing things for us or pointing at things, and without all of those educational resources, it's actually really hard to learn a language or be entirely consumed in a community where everyone's saying the same thing, or you're in a kindergarten classroom or a language classroom where everyone's on the same page about learning it. So it was really what we could extract from her mind into my mind, and that also is something that I always think about when I think about the history of federal Indian policy and the point of regulating people's, languages, religions, what they can wear, what they're supposed to do in American society. And it just made me realize how detrimental it is to take that language out of the equation, because there's so much that is carried through in language. There's so much that, my grandmother literally cannot tell me if it's not in her language. I have memories of people saying things around me around the kitchen table, and I'll go, what are we laughing about? What are we saying? We can't really translate it. I don't know how to, I'm sorry, So it's there's so much that's untranslatable when it comes to culture. And I also have this really vivid memory of being at lunch with my mom and my grandfather. And my grandfather is kind of a quiet guy. I probably heard him say 5 words or sentences in English. So that means that we just literally did not communicate a lot, right? Mm-hmm. But we were at this lunch spot that all the folks go to in Window Rock, which is the capital of the Navajo Nation. And guess he's a popular guy. And so all these people would come over and, start talking to him. Of course, they're speaking in Navajo, and I'm sitting there. We're having this really muted, one-sided conversation. And then he becomes another person. He literally transforms in front of my eyes, speaking to other people in Navajo. And I'm just I don't know this man, and I will never know this man. And that's really sad.
I think with language, things get lost. There's a loss of language, but loss of moments too. With family members, and just like you mentioned, you will never get to know, or you might never get to know someone because they can't communicate or express themselves in their language, and that's the part that I guess hurts when you talk about loss of language and loss of language, especially with our ancestors. And great story.
No, yeah, definitely. It's just losing that meaning over time and stuff, and that can be something that's really upsetting, I guess, for a lot of Natives. How do you think this affected your perception of your Native identity growing up, not really knowing your language, or having somewhat exposure to it, but not so much where you're able to really know that much of it, I guess?
I would definitely agree with you when you said I didn't feel Native enough. At moments I don't feel Native enough because I don't know the language, and also just the inability to communicate with people of an older generation who have all of the knowledge in their minds that I can't really get to. But yeah, there's also a perception, I think, not a perception. I mean, it's true. Like I don't know my entire culture. I don't know that aspect of my culture. That's something that I want to learn. And it will be a lifelong process. I even remember speaking to, one of my like great, I don't know, an uncle or something like that. We don't ever say like exactly what people are, but anyways, he's a great uncle-ish. And, he was teaching me about the designs on this thing, and I asked him like, oh, well, thank you for sharing all that knowledge with me, but like, what is this part of this design? And this like 90-year-old man was like, I don't know, I haven't learned that yet. And the fact that like nobody has this all-encompassing like cultural knowledge is like a bit of it's a comfort to see that like somebody that old has that realization, and it's like, all right, okay, I can still learn this, I can still like,
still time.
Yeah, there's still time, exactly.
As far as for me, thinking about myself, like, I think for me, thinking of myself as Indigenous is kind of new for me. I've always known that my grandparents always spoke Indigenous languages and they speak it in the house. But I didn't think of it as part of my identity because because I'm still kind of learning about identity in general as thankfully I report in this space, so then I get to learn more about it. And I guess when I thought of Native, I've always thought of like US centric. Yeah. And I've never really thought about myself as an Indigenous person until I started diving into, growing up, like Peru has a large Indigenous population. It's very large. And the language was passed down like generations that ended with my grandparents. And, my parents know a little bit, but don't speak it fluently. But there's traits that gets passed on, like physical traits, like my face, and like that's something that I've carried with me. Like I can go to a mountainous area and then see very like similar features of my aunts and my cousins and my grandparents, and just see. Although I'm way taller than them because I'm 5'7", which is I'm really tall, and Ayacucho I'm very tall. So for me it's like I started to kind of feel empowered about the way I looked, and then like my features, my nose, my like things just like that I didn't like growing up, and for me that was a starting point into understanding what I guess like for me like my indigeneity comes from, and then kind of reclaiming this language, reclaiming the words for me that were tossed around as like insults to Indigenous Peruvians in Peru. I like chola, like that was a word that was people would just use to like just like insult someone like that couldn't speak Spanish right in Peru, and like I am a proud chola, like I'm proud to call myself like I didn't immigrate from the Andean region, but like my blood is from the Andean region, and so for me like even though I don't carry it in like customs or anything specific, learning the language is one of the ways I do carry it. And then also, like, I always love saying this, but I proudly carry it in my features and my face because that is what's passed on from generation to generation.
Awesome, great. I guess how can individual like language users and cultural activists contribute to celebrate and recognize Indigenous peoples?
I would say definitely pass the mic. So I'm a journalist, and I can report on I work for a show called Latino USA, and so I report on Latinos in the U.S., which is a translation of what I just said. But I like often report on communities that I'm not exactly a part of. It could be Indigenous Bolivians in like Washington, D.C., or it can be like Colombians in like Texas or something. Like I'm a Peruvian American from Los Angeles. Like I don't really know that perspective. The only thing we share is Spanish, and like culture's different from country to country. And for me, it's like, all right, I'm gonna get to know these people. I'm gonna interview them, and I'm gonna use their voice as much as I can, without kind of just parachuting and just jumping out. Like kind of really getting to know them. So passing the mic is one way for people to, if they want to be an ally, like, just pass the mic.
Yeah.
I I definitely agree with that. Another thing that is like really simple to do is what America did at the beginning, is just remind people that we are always on indigenous land. Like somebody has a relationship to this land whose ancestors have been buried here for thousands of years before, you know, we even settled here, showed up here, lived in Philadelphia. So I think acknowledging history in a really sensitive, but also realistic sort of way to describe it is important. I think, again, delving back into American history, colonial history, ensuring that Indigenous voices and perspectives are held in those spaces, brought up. And then like on a really basic level, I know that like that's a lot to ask of people, teachers who this might be like one day in their syllabus. But since we're talking about language, I think it's really important to name these spaces as native spaces. This is Lenape-Hoking. Yep. The Delaware River is what we call that today, but it's Lenape-Wikitak. I start off I work at the museum, and when I talk to K-12 groups, I start off every single talk with that. And I also make sure that they all walk away knowing at least one Indigenous word, to know that like, you know, we're in such like a Euro-American centric and English centric community. The assimilationist tactics that happen to Indigenous people are still happening today to migrant communities. So I always start off with good morning. Yat e bine, and then I make everyone say it. So
Yat
e bine. Good job. All right. So now you know at least one word in Navajo, and the kids love it. They love yelling it. They love learning something. Okay, you kind of have to yell it to be able to enunciate it like that. So yeah, even if you're not teaching an entire language, like the amazing work that America does, and the language department here does, you're at least incorporating like little words here and there to remind people of the space and the history of this nation, but I guess other nations as well.
Yeah, I think it's also just important generally, like not even just for like allies, but also Indigenous people as a whole to also understand like kind of the underlying reasons why people oftentimes don't know their language. Because like as well, like you have these schools that Native Americans were like sent to like not all that long ago, and like their parents literally had their culture, their names, their language like beat out of them if they like ever showed that, and they came back only speaking English with like a different appearance, with a different like Western name or like European name. And I think it's important to understand how like there are like a lot of natives out there who don't have access to like learning about this sort of stuff, or didn't learn about this sort of stuff growing up because their parents don't want to like give them this information when they know what happened to them when they had this information. Like it's like this cultural like drama, or this generational drama that just keeps on getting passed down. And I think it's great because we're starting, like I think even having like an event like this is so good because we're having these discussions and bringing a lot more attention to Indigenous languages and Indigenous culture, which is something that people oftentimes, like in my experience, think Indigenous people are like extinct, basically. Like there's some sort of extinct species. They aren't here. Like they don't go to UPenn, when I know a pretty big Indigenous community at UPenn. And also like, what even does Indigenous mean? Obviously, like, I mean, like I think we automatically think of like Native, like American specific to like the United States, but also like Aboriginal people, like people who are Pacific Islanders, like people from like South America, like literally Indigenous people are all over the world. And it's also important to keep that in mind because like also a lot of them kind of have similar histories and how they've forcibly lost their languages. So I think it's just kind of important also for Indigenous people to understand that, because I feel like, at least for me, there's always in the past at least been a sort of sense of shame that I don't know my culture. And I think it's important to remind them that, like, this is not your fault. Like, this is not something that, like, you, like, actively, like, weren't given access to. And if you were, that's great. But for a lot of natives, that's not the case. And that's something that I think just really affects their native cultural pride. And then because of that, they don't want to like speak up to say that they're native, and like that makes the population even more disjointed and more disconnected. And like people just feel at least for me, like I've like going to high school as the only Native American, like I felt very isolated. Like one of my history teachers once told me that I was lying when I mentioned I was Native American and stuff. Like, or like there were people like even in my high school who would like, just like going off on Native American issues, like who would be like, oh, he only got into Penn because he's Native American. And these were some of my friends who were saying this sort of stuff. So I think it's important for allies to also, when natives aren't in those spaces, to stand up for them. I know this isn't specific to languages, but just even talking about natives as a whole, like stand up for natives when you're in those situations and understand that we do in fact exist. Like when there isn't a native voice in the room, I guess, it's important to kind of just stand up and be there. There's also like a trillion different resources for understanding more about the history of Native Americans, including classes offered here. Next semester, I believe there are three kind of three indigenous-centric classes besides the Quechua program that's being taught by Americo. So, like, there's a lot of different ways that you can also learn more about this sort of stuff if you're a student here. And, like, I find, for me at least, it's just kind of being, like, if you know where to look, like you have to know where to look in order to find this sort of stuff. And once you do, then you can find, like, there's a big wealth of knowledge. Or even, like, and it's, like, important to know, especially when we're, like, on Lenape land right now, I guess. So... Mm-hmm. So yeah, on that note, I think we just wanted to open up to questions from the audience. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions?
Greetings, cousins. My name is Jasper Jones Bayal, ambassador to Yaxos in the Republic of the Cherokee Indian. And my question to you, did you know that during the period that they call the Revolutionary period, the majority of people in Philadelphia were American Indians?
Mm. Yeah, actually, it's in Philadelphia in the 1700s. It was very common to see Native people around the city. It was probably more common then than it was today. Like it's not. There's a lot of drawings and paintings, and it's in the news. We have a delegation coming because the U.S., the original seat of the government, was in Philadelphia. So delegations of Native people were coming from all over Indian country. I think probably most prominently known, the Haudenosaunee or the Iroquois visited a lot. And it was just such a common sight to early American people that it really was a lot of work to get that out of people's minds, to get Indigenous people in a separate space, literally and temporally. That is real hard work done by the United States government, right, to displace Indigenous people.
Actually, that was the Crown.
And it was both, yeah.
And it's kind of really ironic considering that this is like where a lot of our government started, and Native Americans weren't even granted. I think was it citizenship until like the 1920s, I believe, or something. Yeah. 1924. Yeah. Yeah. So like it hasn't even been 100 years since then, and like even though the government like literally started here on Native land, so that's just something that's like really unfortunately.
It was dual citizenship, by the way.
Dual citizenship. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Over here.
Hi, Stephanie. My name's Kendall. So I'm a full-blood Navajo, or I'm sorry, my dad, he's a full-blood Navajo, and so I'm half. And I have an identical twin brother. And, in the Navajo culture, twins are heroes in the creation stories and stuff like that. Anyway, so I had a thought is that it seems like as Native American people who didn't grow up on the tribe, it seems like it's more a sense of responsibility for us to learn our culture, because my brother went back to school. He went to Diné College on the reservation, and he went there for a year. He's taking a year off. He's going to go back next school year. But he's had to learn the language himself by being there, being immersed, because growing up, our dad said, "Oh, I'll teach you a Navajo word, every day for for the next few months or whatever." And so I remember being in second grade, learning ball and maybe a few other words, and then it kind of just fell off. He's like, "Oh, I'll teach you next week. I'll teach you later. I'll teach you later." And then here I am, I'm 31 now, and so he never continued that lesson. And so I think the point is that parents outside the res will try, but society and everyday stresses will get to them, and they'll say, "I'll do it tomorrow," as we all do in our own lives. And so I think it's remarkable that you're doing this, and I think it's just we have to go out and seek what we can.
I wanted to point out too that there's a free app
Nice.
called Duolingo, and they have a whole bunch of language. I don't know if this is an ad. I'm allowed to say this, but Duolingo has a Navajo app. And
Is that new on
it's
Duolingo?
pretty cool.
Okay,
Yeah,
because
it's
I got Duolingo like 2 years ago to try to learn Spanish, like more Spanish, but like I don't remember seeing Navajo. And I don't know if you know this, but Duolingo, they're based in Pittsburgh. The headquarters is there. Yeah, so if you anybody like studying Navajo language or any kind of languages, if you want a job nearby, you can go to Pittsburgh.
Cool.
Yeah.
But I think you bring up a great point, because like a lot of parents who live off res like attempt to do this on their own, but like they're not trained language teachers, right? So they're just doing it kind of ad hoc, and that's an extraordinarily difficult thing to ask a parent to do. Like, I understand why my mother was not able to make me a fluent Navajo speaker. She's also not fluent herself. So now we have all these wonderful resources. There's tons of stuff online. I actually was watching YouTube videos before this to practice my pronunciation. So there's so much more available today for young people who live in a maybe what you call a diasporic world, or who have to get a job in Pittsburgh, or, you know, wherever, that they can still have access to these language materials. But again, nothing's like learning straight from your grandmother. So.
Okay, I have a question. So, are there any schools taught in native language? Yeah, in the States, I mean, like Navajo or some other languages.
Yeah, actually, that's a thing that is becoming more common. I don't know how common, but there are these language immersion schools. So, for example, the Iroquois have one for, I think, a Mohawk language immersion school. There's a new Navajo language immersion school. I'm sure that there are others. These are just the ones that I heard of. But there are, it's kind of like this whole language reclamation movement is leading to people becoming educators, right? And using, going back to where they're from and using it to immerse children, young children from a young age through, I don't know if they're all K through 12, they're at least like K through 3 or K through 5 or something like that are completely immersive, because that's, you know, a way to learn language. But I don't think many nations have them. I don't know how many there are. That young gentleman, Kendall, mentioned that, you know, Diné College, they have, you know, language courses. High schools on the Navajo Nation have, for the most part, had it as part of like regular, like you can choose like French, German, and Navajo, you know, like it's just an option there because you're on the Navajo Nation. But you know, funding for that comes and goes. It's not always, also by the time you're in high school, it's a lot, the older you get, it is more difficult, they say. But yes, so the answer, yes, there are some.
Okay, so it means that like native languages are offered as language, not like language of instruction for all subjects in the school. Correct?
Both. There's both. There are these immersion schools where you're taught math and I don't know, science and whatever in the indigenous language, and then there's also just regular public schools that have it as an option. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions?
Buenas tardes a los participantes. Muchas gracias por su testimonio lleno de emoción y en algunos casos de dramatismo realmente.
Good afternoon, everyone. I've been following up this conversation full of emotions and excitement.
Mi pregunta va para Janice. ¿Qué es lo que te ha impulsado a echarte a buscar tu identidad? Y si tan solo hubieras migrado hacia Lima, ¿hubieras asumido la misma actitud?
My question goes to Janice. If you talk about the migration history of your family, what if instead of your family migrating to the United States, they would just stay in Lima? Do you think that would you still maybe do the conditions of Peru's capital? Would you maybe would still look or not look for your Quechua identity?
¿Respondo en inglés o español? Inglés. Gracias por la pregunta. Thank you for that question. I would I would say like I would think so, because from the friends I have that live in Peru, there's also similar movements going on to reclaim the language, to reclaim that indigenous identity, indigenous past that we have, that for people in Peru, are grandkids of Andean migrants. And so because of those movements, I feel like I would have continued that path of like looking at my identity and kind of reclaiming that. It did take me a while, but I think it's because I just didn't have the right education to think about it that way, and maybe I wasn't seeking to really think about it that way. But I do believe that I would eventually like want to understand and learn, and because for me, like when I like became more interested in Quechua, I would talk to my grandma and I'd ask her to teach me like little phrases over FaceTime, because they're all in Los Angeles now. And, she would be like, why do you want to learn? And I was like, because like, I want to be able to say little things to you, like, I love you. And I want to say like, how are you doing today? Or things like that. And she'll be like, why? Like, she was so like, I think her attitude, instead of being like, oh yeah, you want to learn, she was like, why would you want to learn this language? And I was like, I was just like, I want to pass it on to my kids in the future. So like, I would like to talk to you as much as I can, like as much time we have here. And she was always like, why? But I'll teach you. And then eventually I told her that I started classes, and then I showed her my workbook, and she mentioned she doesn't know how to read and write, which I understand because it wasn't, an original like written language. And I was like, that doesn't make you any less of a Quechua like speaker. And she was like, okay. And then at the end of our phone call, we like exchanged a few phrases, and she said, I'm really proud of you. And I was like, stop, grandma, I'm gonna cry on FaceTime. But like for me, like I'd want those moments, like if I had never moved, like if my parents had never made the trip to the US, like I feel like I would still, at one point in my life, I don't know where the turning moment would be, if I was a student in Lima or a working professional in Lima. Like, I don't know when that would happen, but I hope that it would. So thanks for the question. Gracias.
I'm curious if any of you in your language learning journeys have encountered any words or concepts that are totally non-existent in English, that you feel now you're able to understand something or express something that can't be. You mentioned untranslatability. The example I thought of, if it's helpful, I've been privileged to learn an African language in my own lifetime, and there's a Swahili word that expresses empathy that is not that doesn't express any culpability. So it's, the translation that's given is sorry, but it actually doesn't presuppose any responsibility on my part. And I always thought that was this beautiful thing that I didn't know I needed in English until I learned it in Swahili. And so I wondered if any of you had that experience with your ancestors' language.
I'm going to say I'm not there yet. Like, I'm learning, like, farm animals. But one of the, I guess an anthropologist would say, philosophical concepts of, Navajo culture is hojo, which people often say is just, like, living in balance, or it's, like, walking in beauty. It's, like, this concept of, like, living, kind of like living a good life, but, like, not exactly. But anyways, it's always like, well, we're saying this is what we're describing it as, but that's not really what it is. So it's kind of like, I don't know, you just kind of have to like see it in context, hear it in context, and then eventually you'll get it. But it's one of those that it's like, it's always translated this one way, but people are always like, but that's not, it's not really what it means, but like, that's how we're saying. Yeah, I know, that's the one that came to mind. But it's like the base of like how we live as Navajo people.
I think as far as, I think for me, like when you said that, I think of words in Spanish, because I grew up speaking Spanish. And like with Quechua, I'm still kind of like forming sentences and like learning like the subject, order, and verb, and like how it looks like in a sentence, which is more complicated than you think. But I think, I mean, I don't know if you mind a Spanish word, but one of my favorite ones is it's me empalagué or me empalagó, which means like I was super sweetened out by it. And it's just like one word, but that's what the meaning is. And I love saying that word because there's no like translation that's not like a full sentence because, yeah. So you can just have a cake and you're like, oh, no, me empalagué. And then they'll be like if you try to translate that, it's like, oh no, that cake was too sweet that I can't have anymore. Like, that's like literally what it means. But yeah.
Any more questions?
Hi, thank you so much for being here. Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm in a similar generational relationship to Yiddish that you are to your indigenous languages. And I had an insight some time ago. I noticed that for me, there was really a duality because Yiddish was the language of the people who loved me best. And so I heard all kinds of sweet endearments and foods in Yiddish, but because my grandparents spoke Yiddish when they didn't want the children to know what they were talking about, Yiddish was also the language of exclusion. And so sometimes when I hear people animatedly speaking Yiddish, a part of me is really certain that the Cossacks are coming. And so in trying to reclaim it, there's this really complicated stew of conflicting emotions about it. And I don't want to draw too many parallels because Yiddish is not an indigenous language, but I wondered if that had any resonance for either of you.
I mean, I definitely get the sense that like when the adults are speaking and they don't want, when they don't want me to hear what they're saying or know what they're saying, that does happen. But I've never really thought about it in that way. Yeah.
I think more so for my parents, I think they might have a different relationship to the language than I do. They, like I said, there's this, every Sunday, my uncles, my dad's brothers, they all get together, and sisters, they get together in Los Angeles. A lot of my family has migrated to Los Angeles now. And they listen to Peruvian radio, and they drink coffee and make hot chocolate and just have a siblings evening. And then they play these games where they do these little rhymes, not rhymes, what's it called when people do a rhyme that's a clue or something, a riddle or something? Yeah, they do riddles in Quechua, and then they want us to answer, but literally me and my cousins just stare at them, and my dad's oldest brother, he's the one who speaks the most fluent, and he'll just throw out these little riddles, and then we have to answer in a certain phrase, which means we're ready to answer, but none of us know what we're saying really. But we're just staring, and it's really funny to hear him, he's trying to teach us, but at the same time he's not, because he's not telling us what the actual riddle is. So I don't know how his teaching techniques are, but for us, I guess I don't hear it, and I don't know if this is your specific question, but I don't consider it a language of exclusion. I think it was just a language that was lost, and I see it just a language that people thought had no value at one point, and they're like my grandma telling me why do you care, and to me it's why wouldn't I care, but to her it's really you're a proficient English speaker, you speak Spanish, that's all you need to survive in the US, in this country. She's that's a pointless language. But for me, it's not, I mean, obviously it's not a pointless language, but because of the things she's gone through, she sees it that way. So yeah, I don't see it as an exclusionary, I don't see it as something I wasn't a part of, but something that just was lost, and it's up to I don't know, maybe our generations, or we're a little removed from it, where we didn't feel the discrimination, but maybe now it's no, this is an important language and we should learn it, and we should try to learn as much as we can and pass that on as much as we can. You mentioned that You learned how to count, like little things. Like I learned how to count too. People don't think that they're teaching someone when they learn how to count, but it's one of the things that always stand out in my mind. Like people trying to teach me to count. So I think like little things like that are important too. Just like passing those on.
Also, sorry, go for it. No. Well, I was gonna say, I feel like we're just like living in such an exciting time where like all of this like language work is happening and it's being taught in universities, and America's working with Hollywood. Like that's really cool. And a few years ago, Star Wars is a big movie for everybody, but Star Wars is also really like beloved by teens living on the Navajo Nation, and so they translated that particular movie into Navajo, and it was such a hit. And then after that, they did a younger one. They did Finding Nemo for little kids. So there are 2 full movies that have been translated into Navajo, which is really amazing. But my mom and I went to see it when it came out, and I called my cousins after they had the premiere in the Navajo, Window Rock, the capital of Navajo Nation, and I was like, how was it? What was it like? What was it like being there? And they're like, well, we brought Grandma and she cried. And I was like, oh my gosh. She's like, why did she cry? And she said that's the first movie, anything she's ever seen that was entirely in her own language. And she just like was so overwhelmed by that. But excited too, that like she could watch something and not have to like read or like think about it. It was just in her language. And I feel like I've also picked up like little things from that movie, like
they teach you.
Yeah,
You're like, I know that movie. Yeah,
I want to watch this again, of course.
And hearing you talk about farm animals and how that's like one of the first things you learned, I thought about how like one of the first things I learned is how to say farm. Like I just like, because I mean they're agricultural communities, at least my grandparents were, like worked on farms with animals, and I just thought a lot about that commonality, like of what you've learned. And then one of the first things I've learned was how to say farm, like I mentioned chakra, but yeah, so it's very interesting and cool. People don't know we're picking it up, but we're picking it up. Even a little word.
Thank you guys all for coming and talking about these things today. And you all mentioned experiences where you felt like not enough, like not Native or Indigenous enough. I was wondering if there were any experiences where you felt the opposite of that, where you felt the most enough?
I mean, for me, I did this program before coming to college. Actually, it's called College Horizons. It's this program that basically brings a bunch of Indigenous students together, usually when they're either going into their junior or senior year, and it partially is to help run them through like the college process. But like what I really came away with it, like knowing was like there's like this sense of cultural pride that it built. It was the first time that I had, it's like a week and a half long program or something. Penn did it actually last year, and I helped out intern with it actually. But it ends up culminating in this kind of like cultural night where everyone brings where whoever is able to brings a piece of their culture, and like will like perform a dance or a song or even just talk about it. And for me, as someone who once again like grew up very far from my homelands, for someone who like felt like very, very disconnected from like kind of like my culture, being in that environment at first, like for a hot second, I think it was definitely like imposter syndrome. Like I was like, oh no, I really am not Native enough. But as I got to know them, as I also started to learn that like, hey, I'm not the only one who feels like this. And that was honestly like such a big turning point in my Indigenous identity, because before that time, yeah, I claimed I was Indigenous, but I don't think I had this want to learn more about my people and more about the stories from my tribe specifically. And I don't think I really understood quite what that meant. And it was something, especially back then, where I was kind of worried to even tell people I was Native American, because I didn't want to come off as that like white person trying too hard to like make themselves seem special, because like that's oftentimes what would happen, because people have this like idea of what Native Americans are. So I think it was really that point in time that kind of made me realize, and like where I felt like really whole with my Native heritage, because I was like, wait, like it's okay to not know this, and it's good to want to learn more. And they were giving us resources and ways to do that. And I think I've especially felt that recently as becoming the undergraduate chair of Natives at Penn, because me and the graduate chair and like just the organization as a whole, we've been really trying to build up this Native community here at Penn, because from what I've found, for a lot of the students who come here who are Indigenous, they don't really know that much about other communities either. Some of them do, and that's great, but a lot of them have never had these sorts of communities, and this is the first time where you can build that sort of community. So I feel like now what we're doing with the club, which I don't think it hasn't done, at least during my time at Penn, we have like bi-weekly meetings. We're trying to get more events going with like other groups on campus. We actually had an event last week with this organization called Table Talk, which brings together groups of people to like just kind of have discussions that they wouldn't be having otherwise, which is like great because we got to educate and just talk with a lot of people about Native issues. And it's really good because like in having a lot more of these meetings, I feel like for the community, but also for myself, like there's this Native community that's being built up here, and I'm building up. I have friends within the Native community and all this other stuff, and I think I am similarly getting to a point where I'm starting to feel much more whole with that and much more proud of that. Where like even when I initially came to college, I initially was kind of worried to tell people that I was Native. Like it took me a few weeks to tell someone that I was Native, and when I did, they like laughed in my face and were like, "Oh, so that's how you got in here?" Like that was their automatic response, and they were kidding, but like that's like a really mean way to kid around with someone. So it's like, but like since then I've grown really proud of that and really happy to tell people about that. So I think it definitely, I think growing up I felt like I wasn't a Native enough, and there are still moments when I feel that way, but at the same time I think in recent years I have felt very proud to be Native, and much more like I am exactly who I need to be, because Natives come in all different shapes and sizes, and there is not just one version of a Native American kind of person. So yeah.
I started, I guess, like finding communities like the ones you mentioned. When I moved to New York, I was, like I mentioned, I'm from Los Angeles. I grew up there. But back home, I'm surrounded by family and friends, like lifetime, like I've just known them all my life. And then I moved to New York, where it's like a new area for me. Trying to surround myself with other Peruvians, like I'm seeking community. But at the same time, I would like be open to attending Andean events. I was really like interested in like, I am interested in Andean culture because that's also part of my culture. But I started going to like Quechua events. It's where I met Americo actually. And that there I would meet like people from the diaspora of like the Andean diaspora, Bolivians, like Ecuadorians, Peruvians, and they were also Americans, like me, like, you know, born in the U.S., kids of like immigrants and like with an indigenous background, with like an Andean background. So like it was just like all these different identities that I have. Like I've never met people so similar to me. And we're all friends in New York. Like we go to like Quechua class together, and like, you know, we get to like hang out and have beers after. Everyone always asks like, what class are you guys from? Sometimes we have workbooks, and sometimes we do our homework with a beer or something. And everyone's like, a Quechua class? And we're like, yeah. But I guess like for me, like those are times where I do feel like, I get to feel indigenous enough, I guess, because, you know, there's times where I don't feel like Peruvian enough because I was born here, and then when I'm talking to someone who's Peruvian, I don't have the accent. So like there's times where I don't feel Peruvian enough, and then there's times where I don't feel indigenous enough because I don't know the language. But like in these spaces, I get to feel like I am like Andean, I am Peruvian, I am like indigenous. And I guess those are times where it's just so comfortable being just myself, and like having shared experiences with people who like don't know the language, and or like have heard, like I've mentioned, like a grandparent speak it in the past, but like, you know, just they don't know it fluently, and I think we share those things. So it's kind of those are spaces where I kind of feel like, okay, like this is where I can claim my identity like proudly, and I think I'm like learning to claim it like more publicly, like as part of my identity. So yeah.
I feel both of you, like aspects of what you both said, like when you differentiated between like indigenous enough and Peruvian enough, like I was thinking that just also listening to you, like there are moments, obviously it depends on the audience, but like there are moments when I feel indigenous enough but not Navajo enough. So that's a weird thing to think, but I grew up, you also mentioned this, like in a school, in a community where I was the only Native kid. I was always the only Native kid, K through 12. So it wasn't that I didn't feel Indigenous or Navajo enough. It was that like I wanted to hide. I wanted to just hide. I'm also very tall, so it's like impossible for me to hide. So whenever, you know, certain times of the year roll around, like this time, I just wanted to like crawl in a bucket and hide, you know, that sort of thing, where it's like I feel like people are always looking at me or like questioning my identity or like, what can you perform for us? That sort of thing. Perform your culture for us. Like I always felt like that was being asked of me. But like you, when I got to college, I found myself in a sea of people, and we were building this. I went to different universities, so it wasn't natives at Penn, it was natives at Boston University. So it was like this group of other students who identified as native and wanted to build a community, and we were like trying to stumble through that together. What does that look like? How do we get the funding? Who's going to support us? Where are we going to be? Where are we going to meet? What are we going to do? What are we interested in? And I was the oldest, and so like it kind of, don't have a maternal bone in my body, but I had to kind of get over myself, right? I had to get over my own insecurities and like become like a shepherd to these younger people who I knew went through the exact same thing that I went through. And so I think that helped, just like forcing myself to be in that role, because I felt that needed to exist.
Yeah. Okay, and on that note, I think we're at time. So thank you so much for everyone for coming.
Thank you. Should we get